Howdy again everyone, and Chinese company Astrhori, also known as Rockstar, are continuing to make a bit of a name for themselves by releasing interesting and unusual manual focus lenses. Today, an 18mm f8 ultra-wide-angle pancake lens for Sony in-mount cameras, full frame or aps-c. This lens also has a special shift feature for adjusting your perspective, which is always fun, although when you do shift the lens, it doesn't cover a full frame image circle anymore. As you can see here, there's huge physical vignetting right in the corners. So this is more of a feature for aps-c camera shooters. Although for full frame shooters, just getting such an enjoyable ultra-wide field of view on a pancake lens does make this very handy and kind of enjoyable to use. Its price is $120 or about £120 here in the UK, and I'd like to thank Astrhori for sending me a copy of the lens for testing, although as usual this is a totally independent review. Let's start by taking a look at the lens itself. As I mentioned, it's very small and totally manual focus, manual aperture and made of metal, with no weather sealing or electronic contacts. The mid-section of the lens rotates 360 degrees with clicks at every 45 degrees. This is to allow you to shift the lens in exactly the position you want. And in order to shift the lens, you need to push it quite hard in the direction you want, basically. There are no controls for the shift mechanism here, and it works quite stiffly. Then comes a narrow manual focus ring, which turns quite precisely and a little heavily. I can't imagine many people seeking to use this lens for video work, but I'll mention for you anyway that the lens does exhibit some focus breathing. The lens has a 58mm filter thread size, and there's no aperture control here. You can only shoot at f8. Well, that's about it really. It's a pretty simply designed little thing. So let's check out its image quality. Firstly, on a full frame camera, my 42MP Sony a7R III. There are no in-camera corrections available with this lens. In the middle of the image we see excellent sharpness, contrast is just good. The lens also has a slightly purple colour cast to it that you'll want to correct in editing. Let's look over in the corners. An image is still visible here, but we are catching softness, darkness and chromatic aberration. So the lens is sharp in the middle, but struggling in those corners on a full frame sensor. Let's take a look at how it performs on aps-c now by mounting it onto my little 24MP Sony a5100. Again, in the middle we see really excellent sharpness. This time the corners look much better, although we're getting some astigmatism here, with the vertical resolution looking clearly a bit softer than the horizontal. So the lens works far better on aps-c, turning in a fairly decent performance. Let's see about vignetting and distortion now. On a full frame camera, as you can see here, the lens projects a very wavy distortion pattern, looking a little like a circus mirror gone wrong. And of course, as we saw before, those corners are very dark. If you're shooting on an aps-c camera instead, then you simply get some lowish barrel distortion, as you can see here, and no vignetting. The lens can focus down to about 34cm, not very close really, but the good news is that close-up image quality is just as sharp as at normal distances. Let's see how the lens performs against bright lights now. When bright lights are directly in your image, the lens holds onto its contrast very nicely. When they're right on the edge of the image, we get sudden flaring at certain points, which you might be able to avoid if you shoot carefully enough. While we're working in the dark, let's take a look at chroma smearing and sun stars. Surprisingly, chroma is well corrected here, making it easier to shoot at night time, although with an aperture of only f8, this lens won't be your first choice for that. Unfortunately, no sun stars are visible here though. And finally, bokeh. Frankly, this is the most out of focus your backgrounds can get with this lens, although the quality of that rather minimal bokeh looks perfectly fine. Overall, the Astrhori 18mm f8 is a somewhat interesting lens and enjoyable to use, but if you go ahead with it, there are many things you should bear in mind. You'll want to correct its slightly purple colour cast in editing, as well as adding a bit more contrast to your images. Not hard to do, admittedly, but still a slightly destructive process. Full frame shooters will have fun with its awesome ultra-wide angle field of view, but they'll also have to suffer with vignetting, weird distortion, and with having to heavily crop any images shot with a shift feature. APS-C shooters will have a less interesting field of view to play with, but quite a sharp lens on their hands nonetheless, especially with that shift feature, which makes it a lot more fun. So if that's the kind of thing that interests you, then for $120 it could be worth a try. Thanks for watching, everyone. Who doesn't like to play around with shift lenses, right? Especially on a pancake lens. I think that's a first for me. Thanks for watching, and I do hope you find these reviews helpful. If you do, and you'd like to support this channel, then supporters over on Patreon get all kinds of exclusive bonus content. So check it out in the description below, and ciao for now.